The era of borderless data has officially hit a wall, and the impact is shaking the foundations of the northern digital landscape. For decades, we operated under the illusion that information was a ghostly essence, floating in a nebulous cloud with no physical home and no sovereign master. But recently, a fundamental policy shift in Canada has forced a tectonic realignment within Meta, the world's largest social ecosystem. This isn't just a technical glitch or a corporate disagreement. It is the first major fracture in the globalized internet as we know it. The world is watching because what is happening in the Canadian corridor represents a massive psychological shift in how nations view their digital borders. We are witnessing the death of the open web and the birth of data nationalism, a movement that treats your personal information with the same strategic weight as crude oil or gold reserves. This policy development represents a monumental pivot in the hierarchy of power between big tech and the state. While the public sees a dispute over links and news sharing, the underlying reality is far more clinical and cold. It is a battle for the custody of the digital footprint. When Meta began rethinking its data storage and content delivery strategy in Canada, it wasn't a tantrum. It was a calculated risk assessment of a new regulatory environment that demands a price for the privilege of connectivity. The bigger picture reveals a world that is no longer content with being a passive consumer of Silicon Valley's architecture. Instead, we are seeing the rise of digital protectionism, where governments are reclaiming the right to tax, track, and tether the flow of information within their own physical borders. The tension is escalating because this isn't just about Canada, it's a blueprint for the next decade of global governance. As Meta navigates these new constraints, they are effectively beta testing a survival strategy for a fractured world. If a nation can successfully leverage its policy to force a trillion-dollar entity to re-engineer its infrastructure, the balance of power shifts overnight. This creates a profound psychological ripple effect across the markets, signaling to investors that the era of frictionless expansion is over. The "move fast and break things" mantra has finally collided with the slow, heavy hand of legislative sovereignty. This matters to you because your digital life is currently being repackaged into a geopolitical asset. Every photo, every message, and every preference is caught in the crossfire of this regulatory tug-of-war. We are moving toward a splinter net, where the quality and freedom of your online experience depend entirely on which side of a physical border you stand. The convenience of a global social graph is being traded for the security of national oversight. But as the servers begin to hum with the weight of these new rules, a much darker question emerges. Is this policy truly about protecting local interests, or is it about something far more structural that the public hasn't even noticed yet? To understand why Meta is rethinking its storage, one must understand the physics of the internet. Data is not weightless. It requires massive cooling systems, thousands of miles of fiber optic cables, and most importantly, a stable legal environment. When a government changes the rules on how that data is monetized or shared, they are essentially changing the rent on the digital land Meta occupies. The psychology of an institution like Meta is rooted in efficiency and predictability. When the Canadian policy framework introduced new liabilities and mandatory payment structures, it broke the predictive model. This forced a pivot from a growth mindset to a defensive posture, where the physical location of servers and the routing of traffic became a matter of legal survival. The stakes here are defined by the logic of the gatekeeper. For years, platforms operated as neutral utilities, but this new policy treats them as publishers with specific fiscal responsibilities. This is a fundamental categorical shift. If a platform is legally responsible for the economic health of a third-party industry, the platform's logical response is to limit its exposure. This is why we saw the sudden disappearance of specific data flows. It was a mechanical necessity to avoid a cascading financial liability. The system is designed to protect its margins, even if it means degrading the service for millions of users. It is an economic chess match where the pawns are the very links and stories that form the daily habits of the population. There is a historical parallel here to the early days of the railroad and telegraph. In the 19th century, nations realized that whoever controlled the tracks and the wires controlled the economy. Today, the tracks are the algorithms and the wires are the data centers. By implementing this policy, the state is attempting to lay claim to the digital infrastructure that was previously managed in a vacuum. This creates a friction point. The tech giant wants a singular global standard, while the nation-state wants a local, controllable variable. This friction isn't just a byproduct of the law, it is the intended outcome. It is an attempt to slow down the digital vacuum and force a redistribution of the value generated by every click and every scroll. This creates a cascading effect where the very nature of an algorithm must be rewritten to respect physical boundaries. We are entering an era of legal latency, where information is slowed down not by the speed of light, but by the speed of a judge's gavel. As Meta reconfigures its Canadian presence, it is stripping away the features that made the platform a global town square, replacing them with a localized, sanitized, and economically compliant version of reality. This is the new architecture of the web, a series of isolated rooms rather than an open field. The company is signaling that it would rather amputate a limb than allow a regulatory infection to spread to its core. But here's the part nobody expected. The shift isn't just about who pays for news. It's about a fundamental change in how the physical hardware of the internet is being rerouted to bypass the very laws meant to capture it. Looking at the global map, the Canadian situation is far from an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a worldwide trend toward digital silos. From the European Union's stringent privacy frameworks to Australia's bargaining codes, a new map of the world is being drawn, defined not by mountain ranges, but by data protocols. Market analysts are beginning to view this as a second great divergence. On one side, we have the vision of a unified open internet. On the other, a series of walled gardens governed by local statutes. This development in Canada has sent a shockwave through other medium-sized economies. They are watching to see if a nation can stand its ground against a platform with a larger GDP than many countries, or if the platform will simply root around the problem, leaving the nation in a digital cul-de-sac. The behavioral economics of this shift are fascinating. When access to information is restricted or the path of least resistance is removed, user behavior changes in unpredictable ways. We are seeing a return to direct-to-source information gathering, or worse, a total descent into echo chambers that are not affected by the new regulations. Historically, whenever a gatekeeper is challenged by a state, the result is a period of intense volatility followed by a new, more rigid status quo. We saw it with the breakup of the big trusts in the 1900s, and we are seeing it now with the unbundling of the social web. Power structures are shifting from those who create the content to those who control the choke point of the delivery system. Other markets, particularly in Southeast Asia and Latin America, are now drafting their own versions of this digital sovereignty policy. They recognize that if they don't act now, their citizens' data will be an exported commodity with zero local return. This is the data mercantilism era. Nations are beginning to treat data like a raw material that must be processed locally to create jobs and tax revenue. The psychological impact on the tech industry is profound. They can no longer build one product for the world. They must now build a modular product that can be adjusted, censored, or taxed differently in every jurisdiction. The efficiency of the global village is being replaced by the complexity of the digital customs house. This fragmentation creates a paradox. The more we try to protect our local digital space, the more we disconnect ourselves from the global engine of innovation. Meta's rethinking of Canadian storage is a cold acknowledgement that the cost of being global is becoming too high. They are moving toward a model of strategic withdrawal, where they only provide full services in regions that align with their specific economic interests. This leaves the rest of the world in a state of digital limbo, caught between the desire for sovereign control and the need for global connectivity. But as we peel back the layers of this geopolitical move, we see that the tension isn't just between the company and the country. It is a conflict between two different visions of the future. One vision sees the internet as a tool for universal human connection, while the other sees it as a strategic domain that must be brought under the same control as land, sea, and air. This leads us to a realization that is far more uncomfortable than a simple policy debate. As Meta reconfigures its presence to adapt to these laws, the very nature of truth and shared reality begins to warp. It gets deeper, because the real transformation isn't happening in the laws themselves, but in the physical wires beneath our feet. The real-world impact of this policy shift reaches far beyond the boardroom or the newsroom. It is currently reformatting the digital life of the average family and worker. When a platform like Meta alters its storage and content strategy, it changes the latency of our culture. We are entering an era where the speed of information and the quality of digital services are determined by your geographic location's regulatory standing. For the worker in the gig economy or the small business owner relying on social discovery, these shifts represent a sudden increase in the cost of doing business. The media often focuses on the fight over news links, but the silent casualty is the seamlessness of the global market. We are seeing the introduction of digital borders that are just as real and just as restrictive as any physical checkpoint. The part the media isn't discussing is the infrastructure flight. As policies become more restrictive, tech giants don't just change their software, they move their hardware. We are beginning to see a trend where data centers and innovation hubs are being relocated to data havens, countries with favorable laws that allow for the free flow of information. This could lead to a digital brain drain for nations that overregulate, as the most advanced AI and cloud services become unavailable or degraded within their borders. It is a silent economic hollowing out, where a country remains connected to the world, but only through a narrow, highly controlled, and increasingly expensive pipe. The psychological toll is a feeling of being left behind in a world that is moving faster everywhere else. This policy shift has triggered a pattern interrupt in how we perceive our relationship with technology. We used to think of the internet as a right, but we are being reminded that it is a service provided by private entities operating within the constraints of state power. This realization is forcing a new kind of digital literacy. People are starting to realize that the platforms they use are not permanent fixtures of the universe, but fragile ecosystems that can be altered or extinguished by a single pen stroke in a government office. The stability we took for granted was merely a temporary alignment of corporate and state interests, an alignment that has now officially ended. As we look toward the horizon, it's clear that the Canadian rethink is just the opening bell of a much larger transition. The real shift isn't just about where data is stored or who pays for a headline. It's about the fact that the digital world is finally losing its virtual status and becoming a physical territory to be conquered, taxed, and walled off. While everyone is focused on the tension between Meta and the Canadian government, the real transformation is already unfolding quietly in the background. A new global architecture is being built, one that doesn't just change how we see the news, but how the world sees us. We are moving from a world of information to a world of permission. Every search, every post, and every cloud-based file is now subject to a complex negotiation between your government and a corporation thousands of miles away. The convenience we were promised in the early 2000s is being replaced by a sophisticated system of control and extraction. And as the final blocks of this new digital wall are laid into place, we have to ask ourselves, was the price of sovereignty worth the cost of our connection? Because while the world is focused on this, the real transformation is already unfolding, quietly and in a place no one expects.